The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of Miller's General Store, and Zelda Patterson stepped down into the frozen mud of Spokane, Washington territory, wearing nothing but a cotton dress more suited to a summer afternoon in Missouri than the brutal January of 1878. Frank Morrison was loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the collective gasp from the small crowd gathered near the store. He turned. A sack of flour balanced on his shoulder and froze at the sight before him. A young woman stood shivering violently in the winter wind, her thin dress whipping around her legs, her lips already taking on a bluish tint. She clutched a small carpet bag to her chest as if it might provide some warmth, but Frank could see from 20 feet away that she was in serious danger. He dropped the flour sack back onto his wagon and strode toward her, already unbuttoning his heavy sheepskin coat. The woman looked up at him with wide eyes the color of amber, her dark hair plastered to her face by the sleet that had begun to fall. She opened her mouth to speak, but her teeth were chattering so hard no words emerged. "We need to get you inside," Frank said, draping his coat around her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, but he could still feel her trembling through the thick material. "Can you walk?" She nodded, but when she tried to take a step, her legs buckled. Frank caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her easily into his arms. She weighed hardly anything at all, and up close he could see that she was not just cold but also exhausted and likely hungry. "Henry," Frank called to the storekeeper who stood gawking in the doorway, "get some coffee on and stoke that fire." Henry Miller jumped into action, and Frank carried his unexpected burden into the warmth of the general store. He set her down gently in the chair closest to the pot-bellied stove, keeping his coat wrapped around her. Her shivering was so intense he worried she might fall right out of the chair. "Thank you," she managed to whisper through chattering teeth. Frank knelt beside her, rubbing her hands between his own to help restore circulation. They were like ice, her fingers long and delicate. "What in God's name are you doing in Spokane in the middle of winter dressed like that?" "I did not know," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of an educated woman. "I have never been west before. They told me Washington was mild, that it rained but stayed warm. I thought I would arrive and find work before winter truly set in." "You thought Washington territory would be warm in January?" Henry Miller asked, appearing with a steaming cup of coffee. "Where are you from, miss?" "St. Louis," she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. "I left 3 weeks ago. The journey took longer than expected. There were delays, and I ran out of money in Walla Walla. A kind family paid for the last leg of my ticket here." Frank studied her face as she spoke. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, with fine features and intelligent eyes that spoke of better circumstances than her current state suggested. "You have people here in Spokane?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. She shook her head. "I have no one anywhere. My father died 6 months ago. He left debts. Everything was sold to pay them. I thought I could find work as a teacher or a governess out west. I read that there were opportunities for educated women." "There are," Frank said, "but not many families can afford private teachers out here, and the schoolhouse already has a teacher." He glanced at Henry, who nodded in confirmation. "I can do other work," Zelda said quickly. "I can sew, I can cook, I can clean. I am not afraid of hard work." The desperation in her voice made Frank's chest tighten. He had seen plenty of hard luck stories roll through Spokane on the stagecoach, but something about this woman's situation struck him differently. Maybe it was the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances, or the intelligence that shone in her eyes even through her exhaustion and fear. "First thing is getting you properly clothed," Frank said, standing. "Henry, you still have those furs that came in last week." The beaver pelts. Sure do. And I got some wool dresses that came in the fall shipment, never sold because most women around here make their own. We will take them, and boots, stockings, under things, whatever she needs. Frank pulled out his wallet. No, Zelda protested, trying to stand but swaying dangerously. I cannot accept charity. I will find work and pay you back, but I cannot simply take from you. You will freeze to death before nightfall in what you are wearing, Frank said bluntly. This is not charity, miss. This is basic human decency. You can consider it a loan if that makes you feel better, but you are getting proper clothing right now. She looked like she wanted to argue further, but another violent shiver stopped her. She nodded reluctantly, and Frank felt a small surge of relief. Stubborn pride he could understand and even respect, but not when it would get her killed. Henry's wife Martha appeared from the back room, having heard the commotion. She was a stout woman with kind eyes and capable hands. "Oh, you poor dear, come with me. We will get you sorted out properly." Martha helped Zelda to her feet and guided her toward the back room where the dry goods were kept. Frank watched them go, then turned to Henry. "Put everything on my account." "That is generous of you, Frank," Henry said quietly. "But what are you planning to do with her after she is warm?" "She said she has no work and no place to stay." Frank ran a hand through his dark hair, which was wet from the sleet. He was 26 years old, owned a ranch 10 miles outside of town, and lived alone except for his hired hand, an older man named Pete who had his own cabin on the property. The ranch house was big, built by his father before he passed, with more rooms than Frank knew what to do with. "I have not figured that part out yet," he admitted. "You could marry her," Henry suggested with a slight grin. "I just met her 5 minutes ago, Henry." "I know, but hear me out. You need help at that ranch. Winter is hard out there alone, and Pete is getting too old to be much real help. She needs work and a place to stay. Plenty of marriages out here start with less." Frank shook his head, though the idea was not as absurd as it should have been. "She is educated, refined. She does not belong on a ranch in the middle of nowhere." "Where does she belong then?" "Back in St. Louis with no money and no family. On the streets here." Henry's expression turned serious. "I am not saying you need to decide today, Frank. But winter is long, and that girl needs more than just warm clothes." Before Frank could respond, Martha and Zelda emerged from the back room. The transformation was remarkable. Zelda now wore a heavy wool dress in deep blue, with proper undergarments that gave her some shape and warmth. Martha had found thick stockings and sturdy boots, and she was wrapping Zelda in a magnificent fur cloak made from beaver pelts, dark and glossy and incredibly warm. "How do you feel?" Frank asked. "Like a human being again," Zelda said softly. "Thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay you, but I swear I will." "We can talk about that," Frank said. "Right now you need food and rest. When did you last have a proper meal?" She thought for a moment. "Yesterday morning, some bread and cheese." Frank felt anger rise in his chest, though not at her. At the circumstances that had brought an educated young woman to the edge of starvation and freezing to death in a strange town. At a world that could treat anyone so harshly. "Henry, put together some supplies, enough for a week. Add it to my account." "Frank, you have already done so much," Zelda protested. He turned to face her and their eyes met. Up close, her amber eyes were even more striking, with flecks of gold that caught the firelight. "Miss Patterson, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." She nodded slowly, wrapping the fur cloak tighter around herself. "My ranch is 10 miles north of here. It is a good spread, cattle and some horses, but it is too much for one man and an aging hired hand to manage properly. The house is big, built for a family my father hoped to have. I have extra rooms, a kitchen that barely gets used and more work than I can handle." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I am not proposing anything improper. You would have your own room, your own space. But I could use help with cooking, mending the garden when spring comes. In exchange, you would have a roof over your head, food, and warmth through the winter. When spring comes and the town gets busier, you might have better luck finding the kind of work you are looking for. But at least you would not freeze or starve in the meantime." Zelda stared at him, clearly trying to assess if this was a genuine offer or something more sinister. Frank could not blame her for being cautious. A young woman alone had to be wary of men's intentions. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he continued. "Martha and Henry here have known me my whole life. They can vouch for my character. I am not offering this out of any expectation beyond honest work for honest pay in the form of room and board." Martha stepped forward. "Frank Morrison is one of the most decent men I know, dear. His father was the same way. If he says you will be safe and treated with respect, you will be." Zelda looked between them, her expression showing the mental calculations she was making. Frank could practically see her weighing limited options against unknown risks. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Morrison. And I promise you will not regret it. I may not know ranch work, but I learn quickly and I work hard." "I believe you," Frank said, and he meant it. There was steel beneath her refined exterior, a determination that told him she was a survivor. They loaded the supplies into Frank's wagon while Zelda stayed warm inside the store. Henry and Martha both clapped him on the shoulder, offering encouragement and knowing looks that Frank tried to ignore. He was helping someone in need, nothing more. The fact that she was beautiful and intelligent was irrelevant. When everything was secured, Frank helped Zelda up onto the wagon seat. Even through the layers of wool and fur, he was aware of how small and delicate she seemed. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. The ride out to the ranch took over an hour in good weather, longer now with the sleet turning to snow. Frank had brought extra blankets, and he made sure Zelda was wrapped securely against the cold. She sat quietly beside him, watching the landscape transform from the rough buildings of Spokane to the wild expanse of Washington territory. "It is beautiful," she said softly as they climbed into the hills. "Harsh, but beautiful. It can be both," Frank agreed. "This land does not forgive mistakes, but if you respect it and work with it, it provides." "Is that how you see it? As something to work with rather than against?" "My father taught me that. He came out here in 1855 before I was born, built the ranch from nothing. He always said the land would give you what you needed if you listened to what it was telling you." "Where is he now?" "Died 3 years ago. Heart gave out one morning while he was checking the cattle. He went quick, which I suppose is a blessing." Frank paused. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter. It was just me and my father after that." "I am sorry," Zelda said. "I lost my mother when I was young too. She died giving birth to what would have been my brother. He died as well." They fell into a comfortable silence, two people who understood loss in a way that created an unspoken bond. The snow was falling more heavily now, big fat flakes that stuck to the horses' manes and piled on the edges of the wagon. When the ranch house finally came into view, Zelda gasped softly. It was larger than she had expected, a solid 2-story structure built from logs and river stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that Pete had the fires going. "Pete, my hired hand, lives in the smaller cabin over there," Frank said, pointing to a structure about 100 yards from the main house. "He keeps to himself mostly, but he is good people. Lost his wife and daughter to cholera years back, never quite recovered from it. Frank pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Zelda down. She stood for a moment, looking up at the building that would be her home for the foreseeable future. Frank wondered what she was thinking, this refined woman from St. Louis who now found herself on a ranch in the Washington Territory wilderness. "Come on," he said gently. "Let us get you inside and warm." The interior of the house was rustic but well built, with a large main room dominated by a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and stairs leading to the second floor. The furniture was simple but sturdy, clearly built by someone who valued function over decoration. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs," Frank explained, setting down the supplies he had carried in. "The largest is mine. You can take either of the other 2. They both have beds and dressers. The linens are clean. I may live alone, but I do not live like a complete savage." Zelda smiled at that, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look younger and less careworn. "I did not think you did, Mr. Morrison. Call me Frank. We are going to be living under the same roof. No need for such formality." "Then you should call me Zelda," he nodded. "Zelda it is. Now you must be starving. Let me fix you something to eat." "I can cook," she protested. "That is supposed to be part of my job, is it not? Starting tomorrow. Today you rest and recover from your journey. Besides, I am not completely helpless in the kitchen. I have kept myself fed for 3 years." He set about making a simple but hearty meal of fried salt pork, beans, and bread. Zelda sat at the table watching him work. "You are different than I expected," she said. "How so?" "The men I have known were never comfortable in a kitchen. They saw it as women's work beneath them." Frank shrugged. "My father taught me that there is no shame in any honest work. He cooked, he cleaned, he mended his own clothes after my mother died. He said a man who cannot take care of himself is not much of a man at all. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He had his moments." Frank set a plate in front of her, piled high with food. "Eat. You need to get your strength back." Zelda ate with restrained enthusiasm, clearly hungry but too well-mannered to wolf down her food. Frank ate his own meal in silence, stealing occasional glances at his unexpected houseguest. She looked better already, the color returning to her cheeks, though he could still see the exhaustion in her eyes. After dinner, Frank showed her to one of the spare bedrooms. It was smaller than the master bedroom but comfortable, with a bed covered in quilts, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. "The water in the pitcher should still be warm," Frank said. "I will bring up your things. The privy is out back, but I keep a chamber pot under the bed for night use, especially in winter." "Thank you, Frank, for everything. I know I have said it before, but I mean it. You saved my life today." He felt his face grow warm. "You would have done the same if our positions were reversed." "I hope so. I would like to think I would." Frank left her to settle in and went back downstairs. He banked the fire for the night and checked that all the windows were secure against the storm. The snow was really coming down now, already several inches accumulated. It was shaping up to be a hard winter, but at least now he would not be facing it entirely alone. The next morning, Frank woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but then he remembered Zelda. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs to find her already at work in the kitchen, moving with efficient grace as she prepared breakfast. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I hope you do not mind. I woke early and thought I should start earning my keep." "I do not mind at all," Frank said, marveling at the spread she had laid out. Bacon, eggs, biscuits, gravy, and fresh coffee. "How did you manage all this? I did not think I had half these ingredients. You had everything you needed. It was just a matter of putting them together properly." She paused, looking suddenly uncertain. I hope I did not overstep. I know this is your house. Zelda, this is the best breakfast I have had in 3 years. You could never overstep by cooking like this." They sat down to eat together, and Frank found himself enjoying the simple domesticity of sharing a meal. It had been so long since he had any real company beyond Pete's occasional taciturn visits. "I need to check on the cattle today," Frank said. "Make sure they weathered the storm all right. You are welcome to come with me if you want to see the ranch, or you can stay here where it is warm." "I would like to come," Zelda said. "If I am going to live here, I should understand how it all works." Frank smiled. "Fair enough. Do you know how to ride?" "A little. My father had a horse when I was young. I have not ridden in years, though. We will take it slow. I have a gentle mare that should suit you well." An hour later, they were both bundled in furs and mounted on horses, riding out into the winter landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Zelda sat her horse better than Frank expected, though he could see her adjusting to the saddle. He showed her the boundaries of the ranch, the winter pastures where the cattle huddled together for warmth, the barn where they kept the horses and stored hay, the creek that ran through the property and somehow never fully froze even in the coldest months. "It is bigger than I imagined," Zelda said. "How do you manage it all?" "Carefully," Frank replied. "And not always successfully. I could use twice the help I have. Pete does what he can, but he is getting older. Some tasks are beyond him now." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves and the occasional call of a crow. Finally, Zelda spoke again. "Can I ask you something, Frank?" "Of course." "Why did you help me? I mean truly, you did not know me. You still do not, really. Why take such a risk bringing a stranger into your home?" Frank thought about his answer carefully. "I suppose because I know what it is like to be alone and struggling. After my mother died, my father went through a dark time. He did not want to go on. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who helped pull him through. She was a Chinese woman whose husband had been killed in a mining accident. She had nothing, but she would come by and cook for us, clean, just be there so my father was not alone with his grief." He paused, the memory still fresh despite the years. "My father never forgot that kindness. He helped her set up a laundry business in town, gave her money to get started. She became successful, sent her children to school back in San Francisco. Before he died, my father told me that the measure of a person is not what they do when it is easy, but what they do when it costs them something." "Helping me cost you," Zelda said quietly. "Some money and some space in a house too big for one person. That is not much of a cost." "It is to me." They returned to the house as the sun reached its zenith, weak winter light filtering through the clouds. Frank showed Zelda how to care for the horses, how to remove the tack and brush them down. She learned quickly, asking questions and paying attention to his answers. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Zelda would wake early and prepare breakfast while Frank tended to the animals. They would eat together, then Frank would head out to work the ranch while Zelda managed the house. She proved to be an excellent cook, creative with the limited winter supplies. She mended his clothes, organized his chaotic pantry, and generally brought order to the domestic side of life that Frank had been neglecting. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Frank learned about her life in St. Louis, her education at a finishing school, her love of books and music. Zelda learned about the ranch, about Frank's dreams of expanding the cattle operation, maybe getting into horse breeding. "You should do it," she said one night, about 3 weeks after her arrival. "The horse breeding, I mean. You have a good eye for animals. I have watched you with them. You understand them in a way that is rare." "It takes capital," Frank said. "Good breeding stock does not come cheap, and it is a risk. Cattle are steady, reliable. Horses are more of a gamble. Sometimes the best things in life are gambles, Zelda said softly. Their eyes met across the fire, and Frank felt something shift between them. It was no longer just two people sharing a house out of convenience. Something deeper was developing, though neither of them had acknowledged it yet. February brought brutal cold and another series of snowstorms that kept them confined to the house for days at a time. Frank taught Zelda to play chess using a set his father had carved years ago. She was a quick study, beating him within a week. "You are a good teacher," she said after one particularly close match. "You are a good student. You do not just learn the rules, you understand the strategy behind them." "My father taught me to think several moves ahead. He said it was the key to success in life, not just games." He was right. Frank studied the board, considering his next move. "Can I ask what happened to him? You said he died 6 months ago, but you never said how." Zelda's expression clouded. "He had been sick for a while, consumption. He hid it as long as he could, kept working. But eventually, he could not hide it anymore. By the time he admitted how bad it was, there was nothing the doctors could do. He died owing money to everyone, the doctors, the landlord. I sold everything to pay the debts, but it was not enough. I left St. Louis with creditors still looking for payment." "That is why you cannot go back," she nodded. "That, and there is nothing for me there anymore. My friends were really my father's friends' daughters. When the money was gone, so were they. I discovered I had no real ties to that life beyond my father." "Their loss," Frank said firmly. "Anyone who would abandon you because of money is not worth knowing." Zelda smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "You barely know me, Frank. How can you be so sure?" "I know enough. I know you are brave enough to travel across the country alone with nothing. I know you are smart and capable and kind. I know you work hard and do not complain. That tells me more about your character than years of polite society ever could." She reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing gently. "Thank you for seeing me that way, for seeing me at all." Frank felt his heart hammer in his chest. Her hand was warm and soft in his, and he did not want to let go. But he did, pulling back slowly. "We should probably get some sleep. Early day tomorrow." He saw the flash of hurt in her eyes before she hid it behind a polite smile. "Of course. Good night, Frank." As he lay in bed that night, Frank cursed himself for a coward. He wanted to tell her how he felt, how he looked forward to every morning because it meant seeing her, how the house felt alive for the first time in years. But what could he offer her? A hard life on a ranch, isolation from the culture and society she had known. She deserved better than that. March brought the first hints of spring, the snow beginning to melt and reveal the brown earth beneath. Frank and Pete started preparing for calving season, repairing fences and checking the herd. Zelda threw herself into planning the garden, studying the seed catalogs Frank ordered and making detailed lists of what to plant. One afternoon, Frank came in from working to find Zelda in tears at the kitchen table, a letter crumpled in her hand. "What is wrong?" he asked, crossing to her immediately. "They found me," she said, her voice shaking. "The creditors from St. Louis. Someone told them where I was. They are demanding payment or they will take legal action. They say I can be jailed for fraud, for leaving without paying my debts." Frank felt anger surge through him. "Let me see that letter." He read it carefully, noting the legal jargon and threats. "This is from a lawyer named Harrison Webb in St. Louis. Do you know him? He represents several of the people my father owed money to. He is determined to collect every penny, even if it destroys me in the process." Frank set the letter down and knelt beside her chair. "How much do you owe?" "Almost $800. It might as well be $8 million. I could never earn that much." $800 was a significant sum, but Frank had been saving for years, planning for the horse breeding operation he wanted to start. He had nearly $1,000 put away in the bank in Spokane. "I can pay it," he said. Zelda stared at him. "What? No. Frank, I could never accept that. It is too much. It is money sitting in a bank doing nothing. I would rather use it to help you than let it gather dust. But your dreams, your plans for breeding horses, you have been saving that money for years. Dreams can wait. You cannot." He took her hands in his. "Zelda, these past months with you here have been the best of my life. You brought light and warmth to this house, to my life. If paying off these debts means you can stay without fear, then it is worth every penny." "I cannot let you do this," she whispered, though he could see the hope in her eyes. "You are not letting me do anything. I am choosing to do it." He paused, knowing he needed to be honest about his motivations. "And I am not being entirely selfless. I have ulterior motives." "What motives?" Frank took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "I am in love with you, Zelda. I think I have been since the day you stepped off that stagecoach, half frozen and stubborn as a mule. These months living with you, talking to you, learning who you are, I have fallen deeper every day. I am paying these debts because I love you and I cannot stand the thought of you being afraid or in trouble." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Frank, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. I am not asking for anything in return. Whether you stay or go, whether you feel the same way or not, I want you to be free of this burden." "You foolish, wonderful man," Zelda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Of course I feel the same way. I have been falling in love with you since you wrapped me in your coat and carried me to safety. Every day you show me kindness and respect and partnership. How could I not love you?" Frank felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "You love me." "I love you," she confirmed. "But I do not want you to give up your dreams for me." "You are my dream now," he said simply. "Everything else is just details." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, pouring all his feelings into that moment. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Marry me," Frank said. "Not because of debts or practicality, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." "Yes," Zelda said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." The next day, they rode into Spokane together. Frank went to the bank and withdrew $850, enough to pay the debts and cover the lawyer's fees. He sent a telegraph to Harrison Webb with the payment, along with a very pointed message that further harassment of Miss Patterson would not be tolerated. Then they went to see Reverend Walsh at the small church on the edge of town. He was a kind man in his 60s who had known Frank since he was a boy. "I want to marry this woman," Frank told him, "as soon as possible." The Reverend looked between them, taking in their clasped hands and radiant expressions. "I see, miss. Do you enter into this marriage of your own free will?" "I do," Zelda said firmly. "I love him and I want to be his wife." "Then I would be honored to perform the ceremony. Shall we say Saturday? That gives you 3 days to prepare and to post the banns." They agreed, and word spread quickly through the small town. Henry and Martha Miller were delighted, taking full credit for bringing them together. Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman Frank had mentioned, offered to make Zelda a dress. She was now in her 60s but still ran a successful tailoring business. "Your father helped me when I had nothing, Mrs. Chen told Frank. "Now I help you in your bride. It is the circle of kindness." Saturday dawned clear and bright, one of those early spring days that promised better weather to come. The church was small but filled with people, more than Frank expected. It seemed like half of Spokane had turned out to see the bachelor rancher marry the mysterious woman from St. Louis. Zelda wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Chen had created in just 3 days. Simple but elegant. She carried wildflowers that Henry's daughter had picked that morning. Frank wore his best suit, the one his father had been married in. As they stood before Reverend Walsh and exchanged vows, Frank looked into Zelda's amber eyes and saw his future. A future full of love and partnership, of building a life together on the ranch they both loved. I, Frank Morrison, take you, Zelda Patterson, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his voice strong and clear. I promise to love you, honor you, and keep you warm through every winter of our lives together. Zelda smiled at that reference to how they met. I, Zelda Patterson, take you, Frank Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and build a home with you that is filled with warmth and light. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Walsh said. Frank, you may kiss your bride. Frank pulled Zelda close and kissed her thoroughly, to the applause and cheers of everyone gathered. When they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Frank felt a joy so complete it almost frightened him. The celebration afterward at Miller's General Store was raucous and heartfelt. People brought food and drink, musicians appeared with fiddles and guitars, and there was dancing late into the evening. Frank danced with his wife, holding her close and marveling that she was truly his. Happy? He asked as they swayed together. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied. When I arrived here in January, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. They rode back to the ranch under the stars, the night air still cold but the promise of spring in the wind. Frank carried Zelda over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Welcome home, Mrs. Morrison, he said. It has been home for a while now, she replied, but now it is official. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, two people who had fallen in love slowly and deeply coming together at last. Frank was gentle with her, knowing this was all new, and Zelda trusted him completely. Afterward they lay together in the big bed, Zelda curled against Frank's side, her head on his chest. Tell me about the horses you want to breed, she said sleepily. Your dream that you postponed for me. It was not just for you, it was for us, Frank corrected. And it is not postponed forever. We will build up the savings again, maybe in a few years. What if we did not have to wait? Zelda said, suddenly more awake. I have been thinking. We have this big house, extra bedrooms. What if we took in travelers, people passing through need places to stay? We could charge for room and board. I could do the cooking and housekeeping. You would just need to build up the word in town. Frank considered this. It could work. We are on the main road north. People do pass through fairly regularly. And in a few years, when we have children, I could still manage it with help. It would bring in steady money while you build up the horse operation. You have been planning this, Frank said with amusement. I have a lot of time to think while you are out working, Zelda admitted. I want to be a true partner in this ranch, Frank, not just someone who cooks and cleans. I want to contribute to making our dreams come true. You are already more than a partner. You are my equal in all things. Then let us be equal in building our future together. They started small, with word of mouth in town that the Morrison Ranch would take in travelers for a reasonable fee. The first guests arrived in April, a family heading north to try their luck at farming in the Palos region. Zelda cooked them a magnificent dinner, gave them clean beds, and sent them on their way the next morning full of breakfast and praise for her hospitality. More guests followed throughout the spring and summer. Zelda proved to be a natural hostess, making everyone feel welcome while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The extra income added up quickly, and Frank was able to start looking seriously at breeding stock. In May, he bought his first mare, a beautiful Palomino with excellent bloodlines. He named her Sunshine at Zelda's suggestion, and she became the foundation of what Frank hoped would be a successful breeding program. Zelda's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables all summer and enough preserves to last through the winter. She also started teaching reading and writing to some of the local children whose families could not afford the regular school. She did not charge money, instead accepting payment in the form of help around the ranch or fresh game and fish. "You are building a community," Frank told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We are building a community," she corrected. "You are as much a part of this as I am." By the time their first anniversary arrived in March of 1879, the ranch was thriving in ways Frank had never imagined possible. The guest accommodations had become regular enough that they were considering building an addition to the house. The horse breeding operation had 3 mares now, all in foal. The cattle herd was healthy and growing, but the best news came in early spring when Zelda confirmed what they had both suspected. She was pregnant, due in the fall. Frank was overjoyed but also terrified. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out on the ranch far from doctors. He wanted to move them into town for the last months of her pregnancy, but Zelda refused. "This is our home," she said firmly. "Our child should be born here. Besides, we will have plenty of time to get to town if needed." "Women have been having babies for thousands of years, Frank. I will be fine." She was right, though Frank still worried through every day of her pregnancy. She continued working as long as she could, finally conceding to reduce her activities only in the last month. On a crisp October morning in 1879, Zelda went into labor. Frank sent Pete racing to town for the midwife while he stayed with his wife, holding her hand and feeling utterly helpless. Mrs. Chen arrived with the midwife, both women taking charge with calm efficiency. They banished Frank from the bedroom, sending him downstairs to pace and worry. Pete, who had returned from town, sat with him in silent solidarity. Hours passed, the longest of Frank's life. He heard Zelda cry out in pain and wanted to rush upstairs, but Mrs. Chen appeared at the top of the stairs and sternly ordered him to stay put. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard it. The strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Frank's legs nearly gave out from relief. Mrs. Chen appeared on the stairs, smiling. "You have a son, Frank. A big, healthy boy." And Zelda did wonderfully. "She is tired but well." Frank took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find his wife propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. The midwife was cleaning up and Zelda looked up as he entered. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Frank approached slowly, almost reverently. Zelda pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. The baby's eyes were closed, but his little fists waved in the air as if already ready to take on the world. "He is perfect," Frank whispered, touching one tiny hand gently. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's finger, gripping with surprising strength. "He has your determination," Zelda said with a tired laugh. "He fought his way into this world like he had somewhere important to be. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Zelda said, "What about James, after your father?" Frank felt his throat tighten with emotion. "James Morrison. He would have loved that. He would have loved you. I wish I could have met him, but I will make sure our son knows all about his grandfather, about the good man he was." The midwife and Mrs. Chen left after ensuring that both mother and baby were stable and healthy. Frank sat beside the bed, unable to take his eyes off his wife and son. "I love you," he said. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Zelda replied. Thank you for wrapping me in furs and keeping me warm, for saving my life and giving me this beautiful new one." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. James was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both busy. But they managed, working together as they did with everything else. Pete proved surprisingly good with the infant, often rocking him to sleep so Zelda could get some rest. By the time James was 6 months old and spring returned to the ranch, they had settled into a rhythm. Zelda managed to care for the baby while still running the guest accommodations, though Frank took on more of that work himself. The horse breeding program was showing real promise, with 2 healthy foals born that spring. On a warm May afternoon in 1880, Frank and Zelda sat on the porch watching James attempt to crawl on a blanket spread on the grass. He was determined, pushing himself up only to fall forward but never giving up. "He is just like you," Frank observed. "Stubborn and determined." "He is like both of us," Zelda corrected. "My stubbornness, your strength. Speaking of stubbornness, have you given any more thought to my suggestion about building a proper guest house?" They had been discussing it for months. The main house was getting crowded with the 3 of them plus guests, and there was clearly demand for more accommodations. "I think we should do it," Zelda said, "but I want to make sure we do it right. Build something that will last, that we can pass down to James and any other children we might have." "Other children?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "You thinking about having more already?" "Maybe not immediately," Zelda said with a laugh. "But yes, eventually. I always wanted a big family. I hated being an only child." "Then we will have a big family," Frank promised. "As many children as you want." They built the guest house that summer, a sturdy structure with 4 bedrooms, a shared sitting room, and a separate dining area. Zelda designed the layout to be welcoming but efficient, and Frank made sure the construction was solid. By fall, it was complete and immediately popular with travelers. The additional income allowed Frank to expand the horse operation significantly. By 1882, the Morrison Ranch was becoming known throughout the territory for quality horses. Frank had a gift for breeding and training, producing animals that were intelligent, sturdy, and beautiful. Zelda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace, in the spring of 1882. She was smaller and quieter than James had been, with her mother's amber eyes and delicate features. James, now nearly 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch prospered, the children grew, and Frank and Zelda's love deepened with each passing year. They faced challenges, of course. There were hard winters, sick animals, difficult guests, and all the normal struggles of life. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. In 1884, their 3rd child arrived, another boy they named Thomas. He was the easiest of the 3, a happy baby who seemed content with whatever was happening around him. With 3 children under 5, the house was chaotic but filled with love and laughter. Pete passed away in his sleep in the winter of 1885, leaving Frank without his longtime helper. But by then, James was old enough to start learning ranch work, following his father everywhere and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Frank hired a young man named Charlie to help with the heavy work, but James was already proving himself capable beyond his years. One evening in March of 1886, Frank and Zelda stood on the porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times over the years. Inside, the children were being watched by Charlie's wife Emma, who had become Zelda's friend and frequent helper. 8 years, Frank said softly. "It has been 8 years since I found you freezing in the street, wearing summer clothes in the middle of winter. Best decision I ever made, getting on that stagecoach," Zelda replied, leaning into his embrace. "Even though I had no idea what I was getting into. You brought so much to my life, to this place. I was just surviving before you came. You taught me how to truly live." "We taught each other," Zelda said. "I was lost and you found me. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. Everything I have, everything I am now, started the day you wrapped me in furs and carried me to safety." Frank kissed the top of her head. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. Every single day, I would choose you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. The ranch spread out before them, a testament to their hard work and partnership. In the distance, they could see the horses in the pasture, including Sunshine, who was now the proud mother of several magnificent foals. The guest house was full, smoke rising from its chimney. The main house behind them was warm and welcoming, filled with the sounds of their children playing. "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked suddenly. "Giving up your savings, taking a chance on a stranger, changing your whole life?" Frank turned her to face him, taking her face gently in his hands. "Not for one single second. You are my life, Zelda. You and our children and this home we have built together. I was half alive before you came. You woke me up. I love you, Frank Morrison. I love you, Zelda Morrison, today, tomorrow, and forever." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Inside, they could hear the children calling for them, and they smiled against each other's lips. "We should go in," Zelda said reluctantly. "In a minute. Let me hold you just a little longer." So they stood together on the porch of their home, wrapped in each other's arms against the evening chill, and counted their blessings under the emerging stars. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family. In 1888, Zelda gave birth to twin girls, Ruth and Rose, who were as different as night and day despite being identical in appearance. Ruth was bold and adventurous like James, while Rose was gentle and thoughtful like Grace. With 5 children and a thriving business, the ranch was busier than ever. James, now nearly 9, was a competent ranch hand, working alongside his father with the horses. Grace helped her mother with the guest house, already showing signs of inheriting Zelda's hospitality skills. Thomas was the peacemaker of the family, able to settle disputes between his siblings with wisdom beyond his 6 years. The Morrison Ranch had become a landmark in the region. People traveled from as far as Seattle and Portland to buy Frank's horses, and Zelda's guest house was renowned for its comfort and excellent food. They had hired several employees over the years, people who became like extended family. Mrs. Chen, now in her 70s, still visited regularly, bringing gifts for the children and sharing stories of the old days. She told the children about their grandfather James Morrison and about how their father had learned kindness and generosity from his parents. "Your father saved your mother," Mrs. Chen told the children one afternoon. "But really, they saved each other. That is what love does. It makes both people better, stronger." In 1890, Frank and Zelda celebrated their 11th anniversary with a party at the ranch. It seemed like the entire territory showed up, a testament to the place they had carved out in the community. Henry and Martha Miller came from town, now elderly but still sharp and engaged. Reverend Walsh, who had married them, gave a blessing for their continued happiness. As Frank watched Zelda laugh with their friends, surrounded by their children, he felt overwhelming gratitude. This life they had built together exceeded anything he had imagined possible back when he was a lonely bachelor struggling to keep the ranch running. That night, after all the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Frank gave Zelda a gift. It was a fur cloak, similar to the one he had bought her that first day, but even finer. The pelts were the softest beaver, expertly crafted by a furrier in Spokane. "You already gave me furs once," Zelda said, running her hands over the luxurious material. "That was to keep you alive," Frank said. "This is to remind you that I will always keep you warm, always take care of you, always love you. No matter how many years pass, you will always be the woman I found in winter and vowed to protect forever." Zelda's eyes filled with tears. "You have kept every promise you ever made to me, and I will keep making them for the rest of our lives." The 1890s brought both challenges and triumphs. There was a hard winter in 1893 that killed several head of cattle and tested their resilience. But they weathered it together, as they did everything. The children grew into capable young people, each finding their own role on the ranch. James, at 14, was already eyeing a neighboring property where he hoped to start his own ranch someday. Grace, at 11, talked of becoming a teacher like her mother had once hoped to be. Thomas, at 9, showed a gift for working with difficult horses, able to gentle them with patience and understanding. The twins, Ruth and Rose, were 7 and inseparable, already helping with the younger guests who came to stay. In 1895, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again at the age of 39. It was unexpected, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous ones. But in early 1896, she delivered a healthy boy they named Daniel. He was their unexpected blessing, born when they thought their family was complete. Frank was 45 now, his dark hair showing threads of silver. Zelda's hair had a few gray strands as well, but she was still as beautiful to him as the day he had first seen her. More so, actually, because now he knew every facet of her personality, every strength and quirk and passion. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, Frank began to think about the future and legacy. He sat down with James, now 17 and a young man in his own right, to discuss the ranch. "This will all be yours someday," Frank told his son. "You and your siblings. But I want to make sure you are ready, that you understand what it means to run a place like this." "You and Mother have taught me well," James replied. "I know it is not just about the work, but about the people, the community, the responsibility." "Your mother is the one who really built this into what it is," Frank said. "When she arrived, I had a struggling cattle ranch. She turned it into a home, a business, a place people want to come to. Never forget that." "I never will. Mother is the strongest person I know," Frank smiled. "She is the strongest person I know too." In 1899, as the new century approached, the Morrison family gathered for a portrait. It was something Zelda had wanted for years, a record of their family at this moment in time. A photographer came from Spokane with his equipment, setting up in front of the ranch house. They arranged themselves carefully. Frank and Zelda seated in the center, baby Daniel on Zelda's lap. The older children arranged around them, James standing tall behind his father's shoulder, Grace beside her mother Thomas, Ruth and Rose completing the group. Everyone wore their finest clothes and the photographer fussed over the composition. "Stay very still," the photographer instructed. "This will take a few moments." As they held their positions, waiting for the camera to capture them, Frank reached over and took Zelda's hand. She squeezed back, and he saw her slight smile despite the instruction to remain still. The resulting photograph became a treasured family heirloom, capturing them at a moment of prosperity and happiness. Whenever Frank looked at it in later years, he was transported back to that day, remembering the feel of Zelda's hand in his and the rightness of having all their children gathered together. The turn of the century brought changes to Washington, which became a state in 1889. Spokane was growing rapidly. becoming a real city with industry and culture. The Morrison Ranch remained a constant, though, a piece of stability in a changing world. James married in 1901, bringing home a sweet-natured girl named Sarah who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house on the northern section of the ranch, starting their own life while remaining part of the larger Morrison operation. Their first child, a son they named Frank after his grandfather, arrived in 1902. Holding his grandson for the first time, Frank felt the circle of life complete. "Hello, little Frank," he whispered to the baby. "You have big boots to fill with that name, but I know you will do just fine." Zelda stood beside him, watching with joy as her husband met his first grandchild. At 46, she was a grandmother, though she hardly looked old enough for the role. She was still active in running the guest house, still tending her garden, still the heart of the family. Grace announced her intention to attend normal school in Spokane to become a teacher, fulfilling her mother's original dream in a way. Frank and Zelda were proud, if a bit worried about their daughter living in the city. But Grace was sensible and determined, and she thrived in her studies. Thomas, now 20, had become Frank's right hand in the horse breeding operation. He had a gift that exceeded even his father's, able to predict which pairings would produce the best offspring. Under his guidance, the Morrison horses became some of the most sought after in the Northwest. The twins, Ruth and Rose at 16, were being courted by various young men from the area. Ruth had her eye on a young rancher's son, while Rose seemed more interested in continuing to work with the guest house alongside her mother. Daniel, the baby at 6 years old, was bright and curious, following his older siblings around and absorbing everything. He was particularly close to Zelda, often sitting with her in the evenings as she read or sewed. On their 20th anniversary in 1899, Frank took Zelda on a trip to Seattle, their first real vacation in years. They left the children and the ranch in James and Sarah's capable hands and took the train west. Seattle amazed them both with its growth and energy. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, attended a concert, and walked along the waterfront. But after 3 days, they were both ready to go home. "I enjoyed this," Zelda said as they boarded the train back to Spokane. "But I miss the ranch, the children, our life there." "Me too," Frank agreed. "I suppose we have become too settled in our ways to enjoy city life for long." "Not settled," Zelda corrected. "Content. There is a difference." Back at the ranch, they fell into their familiar rhythms with relief and satisfaction. This was where they belonged, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. The years between 1900 and 1910 were perhaps the most prosperous of their lives. The ranch was fully mature now, running smoothly with the help of their children and employees. The guest house was always full during the traveling season. The horse breeding operation was renowned throughout the region. Frank and Zelda began to ease back from the day-to-day operations, letting James and Thomas take on more responsibility. Grace returned from normal school and opened a small school on the ranch property, teaching not just the Morrison children, but also children from neighboring ranches and farms. The twins both married in a double wedding in 1905, Ruth to her rancher's son, and Rose to a businessman from Spokane, who was charmed by her warmth and hospitality. They both stayed in the area, Ruth on a neighboring ranch and Rose in town where she opened her own boarding house, using the skills she had learned from her mother. Daniel was growing into a thoughtful young man with a love of learning that rivaled even his mother's. At 14, he talked of perhaps becoming a lawyer or a teacher, interests that Frank and Zelda encouraged. In 1908, Frank turned 58 and Zelda 52. They were grandparents several times over now, with more grandchildren on the way. The big house that had once seemed empty was regularly filled with children and grandchildren, noise and laughter and life. One winter evening, 30 years almost to the day after Zelda had arrived in Spokane, they sat together by the fire in the exact same spot where they had shared so many conversations over the years. "You remember that first winter?" Frank asked, his arm around Zelda's shoulders. "I remember being so cold I thought I would never be warm again," Zelda replied. "And then you appeared like something out of a fairy tale and wrapped me in furs. You looked so small and lost, standing there in that summer dress. I could not just walk away. I am glad you did not. Though I am also glad I do not know what would have happened if you had. I prefer this reality." "This is a good reality," Frank agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, snow was falling softly, blanketing the ranch in white. But inside was warm and safe, the home they had built together, a refuge against the cold. "Frank," Zelda said softly. "Yes, thank you. For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me. I have been happy every day since I married you. Even the hard days. Especially the hard days, because we faced them together." She turned to look at him. "You kept your promise. You wrapped me in furs and kept me warm forever." Frank kissed her, still feeling that spark that had been there from the beginning. "And I will keep keeping that promise for as long as I have breath in my body." They made it to their 31st anniversary in 1910. The family gathered at the ranch for a celebration, 3 generations of Morrisons filling the house and guest house to capacity. There were children running everywhere, babies crying, adults talking and laughing. It was chaos and joy in equal measure. Frank stood on the porch watching his family and felt Zelda's hand slip into his. "We did this," she said quietly. "Look at what we built." "You built it," Frank corrected. "I just provided the land and the labor. You provided the vision, the warmth, the love that turned a house into a home." "We did it together," Zelda insisted. "Everything we have accomplished we did as partners. That is why it worked." Their children gave speeches at dinner, talking about the lessons they had learned from their parents. James spoke of his father's work ethic and integrity. Grace talked about her mother's intelligence and strength. Thomas praised the partnership he had witnessed his whole life, the way his parents supported and respected each other. The twins and Daniel added their own thoughts, stories, and appreciation. When it was Frank's turn to speak, he stood and looked around the table at the faces of his children and grandchildren. "I am not a man of many words," he began. "I am a rancher, more comfortable with horses than speeches, but I want you all to know something important." He looked at Zelda, seeing the young woman she had been and the mature woman she was now, both equally beautiful in his eyes. 31 years ago, your mother arrived in Spokane in the middle of winter, completely unprepared for the cold. I gave her my coat, bought her warm clothes, brought her to this ranch. People might think I saved her that day, but the truth is she saved me." Zelda's eyes filled with tears, and Frank continued. "I was alone, going through the motions of living but not really alive. She brought light and warmth and purpose into my life. Everything good that has happened since that day is because she was brave enough to get on a stagecoach to an unknown territory, and I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time to meet her." He raised his glass. "To my wife, the strongest, smartest, most loving woman I have ever known. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for giving me all of you." He gestured to the gathered family. "Thank you for everything." Everyone raised their glasses, toasting Zelda, who was openly crying now. Frank sat down and pulled her close, letting her lean against him as she wiped her eyes. "I love you," she whispered. I love you too. Today, tomorrow, and forever." The celebration continued late into the night with music and dancing and storytelling. The older grandchildren played with the younger ones while the adults reminisced about years past. Frank and Zelda danced together as they had at their wedding, moving slowly to a waltz played on Thomas's fiddle. "I am tired," Zelda admitted as the song ended, "but it is a good tired. The tired of a full, happy life." "Then let us go to bed," Frank said. "Tomorrow is another day and we will face it together as always." They said good night to the family and climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room they had shared for more than 3 decades. Frank helped Zelda out of her dress and she helped him with his collar and tie. They moved with the ease of long practice, comfortable in their routines. In bed, Zelda curled against Frank's side, her head on his chest. "Do you think we will have many more years?" she asked quietly. "I hope so. But however many we have, I will treasure each one." "Me too." She was quiet for a moment. "When I die, I want it to be like this, in our home, in our bed, with you beside me. Do not talk about dying. We have years left. I know. But when the time comes, I want you to know that I died the happiest woman alive. You gave me everything I ever wanted and so much more." Frank held her tighter. "You gave me the same, but let us not talk about endings tonight. Let us just be grateful for right now, this moment together." "Together," Zelda agreed softly. "Always together." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before. Outside, the snow fell softly on the ranch, on the house where their family slept, on the land they had worked together for so many years. Frank and Zelda Morrison had many more good years after that night. They watched more grandchildren be born, saw their children's lives flourish, and continued to be the heart of the family they had created. The ranch remained prosperous, a testament to their hard work and partnership. When Zelda finally passed away in 1925 at the age of 69, it was exactly as she had wished. In their bed, in their home, with Frank holding her hand. She went peacefully, surrounded by love, leaving behind a legacy of warmth and family that would continue for generations. Frank followed her 2 years later, unable to find much joy in a world without his wife. He was 77, and the doctor said his heart simply gave out, but the family knew better. He died of a broken heart, missing the woman who had been his partner for nearly half a century. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a shared headstone that read, "Frank Morrison and Zelda Morrison. Partners in life, partners in love, together forever." She arrived in winter with summer clothes. He wrapped her in furs and kept her warm forever. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants. The house remained standing, carefully maintained and preserved. The guest house still welcomed travelers. The Morrison horses were still some of the finest in the Northwest. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell softly and the fires burned warm inside, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would gather and tell the story of how it all began. The story of a young woman who arrived in Spokane in the middle of winter, completely unprepared and nearly freezing to death. The story of the rancher who saw her, wrapped her in his coat, and changed both their lives forever. It was a love story, a Western story, an American story. But most of all, it was the story of 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together that lasted far beyond their lifetimes. A story of love, partnership, and the warmth that comes from finding the person you are meant to spend forever with. And that warmth, like the furs Frank had wrapped around Zelda on that cold January day in 1878, lasted forever.